Hi everyone, thank you for joining for this morning's webinar. My name's Kath Crowther. I'm the Regional Director for the CLA in the East and your chair for today. Before I introduce our speakers, can I remind you of the wealth of information and guidance which is available on the CLA web pages, including specific pages relating to COVID-19. We've recently produced new guidance to help members meeting the government's conditions on reopening their tourism businesses, including operational procedures, guidance on risk assessments and communication methods for business, visitor and local communities. Members also get access to free advice from our specialist advisors in the region and in London. Please get in touch with your regional office. If there's anything we can help you with, it's what we're here for. These inquiries also help feed into our very regular meetings with government departments and help us establish our lobbying position on different matters. Whilst COVID has been taking up a huge amount of our time over the last few months, we've also been working hard for you on various other topics. The future of farming support mechanisms are high on the agenda. The Agriculture Bill started the committee stage in the House of Lords this week, and we continue to work with peers and MPs on amendments, including ensuring a fair transition away from direct payments. We are encouraging members to write to their MPs on this point ahead of the bill returning to the Commons. A template letter was sent out to members in the e-news last Friday, or you can get a copy from your regional office. The CLA has also submitted our response to the Elm consultation, which closes on the 31st of July. If you'd like to see a copy of that to help with your response, it is available on our website, or again, get in touch with the regional office. Moving on to today's webinar, after a terrible autumn and winter with flooding followed by a period of sustained dry weather, our members have been suffering and water is very topical. With this in mind, the CLA is currently drafting a new water strategy which will be published later this year. This will in turn inform the CLA's spending review submission. I should remind you that today's webinar is being recorded for future use, and the recording will be available on the webinar page of the CLA website within about 24 hours. Please feel free to ask questions at any time during the presentations today by using the Q&A button, which should be at the bottom of your screen. We'll attempt to answer as many questions as possible at the end of the presentations. You can see the lineup for today's webinar here, and I would now like to hand you over to Alice RITCHIE, who is the lead on water in the CLA team.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Alice RITCHIE. I am the CLA lead on climate change and water, two very interlinked topics, and both are coming sort of quite quickly up the government's agenda. So I think this is a really great time to be having a webinar about climate change, adaptation and water. We sort of know that we're already seeing most of the impacts of climate change at the moment, and nowhere I think is this going to be more noticeable, I guess, than in the water environment, and farmers and landowners are really going to be at the front line of those impacts. So I will get straight into it. We, as I said, are already seeing the impacts of climate change with warmer, wetter winters and hotter, drier summers. That's sort of generally accepted to be what things are going to be looking like going forward. The head of the Environment Agency came out, was it a couple of weeks ago, I think now, saying that the UK can no longer really be considered a wet and rainy country, which I'm sure gave everybody a bit of an identity crisis. But the maps that you've got that you can see on the screen there show actual weather that happened last year. So this isn't projections, this isn't what we think 2050 might look like, this is what actually happened in 2019. That first map shows you that we had significantly more rain than the average. Oh no, sorry, the first one's about temperature. That we had the whole country, particularly the east of England, was significantly hotter last year than the average. The middle one shows rainfall, and you can see there that probably across the country it was about normal, but we had areas where there was quite a lot less or quite a lot more, particularly in the east or in the Midlands. And that last map shows the average sunshine hours. So yeah, a lot more sunshine, particularly in the east of England. I think that's an area where we're really going to see the impacts of climate change. And for a bit of comparison, if you just look at the middle map, the rainfall one, you'll see there that's February's rainfall. So we had some real extremes during February 2020 with pretty much more than 200% of average rainfall across the entire country that month. And then if you look at the third map there, that's April's sunshine hours. So we sort of went from these extremes of heavy rainfall straight into what was, I mean, quite a glorious month, but for farmers and landowners might not have been as great, really, just having that constant dry weather, and quite a wee bit scary, I suppose, right at the start of summer, having such little rainfall. Which sort of leads me into the next slide. We're going to see this increased risk of extreme weather events, so flood, drought, coastal erosion, but also an increased risk of pests and diseases, which I think will really impact those who manage land in the first instance, and is something that we need to be thinking about how we can increase our resilience to. So what does it actually mean for farmers and landowners and land managers across the country? For a start, having less rain, drier weather is going, and events of drought is going to greatly impact how we access water and use water and how we abstract. So that's sort of going to be one area that we are really going to see potential changes and have to start looking at solutions. The second is around land drainage and flood risk, with more water and trying to get rid of it, basically. And both of those, flood and drought, can have quite a big impact on water quality. So that's sort of the other area that I think farmers and landowners are going to have to be looking at, trying to mitigate the impact that they have on the wider water environment. So I'll go quickly through each of those areas and talk about some of the potential solutions that we can be looking at. Some of these solutions are things that we need the government to help us out with. Some are very much in the hands of farmers and landowners, and we can get on and start doing them today. And others are things that we just need collaboration, innovation, and looking kind of across catchments and across the sectors to start getting some solutions. So when we're looking at abstraction and drought, the key challenges that I think we're going to be facing, sort of moving towards, up until 2050, is access to water for food production in dry years. We know that water is critical for food production, and so it's really important that we still have access to it. Even when they're in periods of dry weather or drought. There's also going to be some competing pressures from other sectors. So it's looking like the population of the UK is going to go from 67 million to about 75 million. So that's going to be a lot. There's going to be a lot more pressure from public water supply, a need for more water. And at the moment, the way that we're heading, we're set to run out of water in about 25 years. So it's really important that we start balancing out the needs of all of the other sectors. There's also significant water use in things like the energy sector and infrastructure and things like that. The other challenge that we're facing is a lack of representation within different catchments. There tends to be a slightly lower level of farmer and landowner representation in these groups. So it's really important that we make sure that our voice is heard That's where the CLA and other groups like the NFU come in, and I think are really important just to make sure that farmers and landowners' interests are represented in the water space. So solutions to these problems that the CLA thinks are sort of the most important at this stage. The first is irrigation efficiency. So it's really crucial that farmers and landowners think about the way that they use water and, where possible, reduce it so that they're less reliant on it if they can be. But they're also using what they have in the most efficient way possible. The little picture in the sort of top right, I'm not sure if you can quite see what it is, but it's an on-farm reservoir, which we think is really, really important going forward. We need to be encouraging the construction of smaller on-farm reservoirs to just increase resilience, give people a bit more, or give farmers a little bit more certainty about their water supplies. But we do need help from the government in terms of grant funding and investment and making the planning process easier, because it's not a fun process to go through from start to finish building a reservoir, but the sort of certainty and resilience that it gives you is sort of unparalleled, really. So we really want to be pushing an increase in on-farm reservoirs. And just down to the left of that one, you can see a bigger reservoir. It's also really important, given population increase and climate change, that other sectors also have an increased amount of water to access. So we need the government, particularly in this period of post-COVID recovery, we need the government to be incentivising and investing in nationally significant infrastructure like big reservoirs, like water transfers, all of that kind of stuff, just innovative and yeah, nationally significant infrastructure. Collaboration across catchments and in different water resources groups. So you'll hear from Robin shortly about the work that Water Resources East is doing. And I think at the moment it's very much seen as the benchmark. The work that they're doing is fantastic and really collaborative and involves all the different sectors. So we need to be seeing that across the entire country to make sure that we can find solutions that work for all sectors. And the final one I've got there is personal household water use. It shouldn't really just be on farmers and landowners to think about their water consumption. It's really important that the public think about water in a slightly different way. It's not a sort of infinitely renewable resource that we tend to think of it as. So it's important that we start making it clear that, yeah, the public needs to be thinking a little bit more about how they use water, and where possible, trying to reduce their personal water footprint. So moving on to land drainage and flood risk, yeah, all about avoiding water when you don't want it. The challenges we're facing is that flooding is extremely unpredictable. The response and recovery is getting increasingly expensive. I mean, last year alone, we had a number of different flood events that sort of happened in quick succession, massively impeding recovery and response and decreasing long-term resilience. So it's really important that we are trying to make ourselves as, or sort of mitigate flood risk as best we possibly can. There's slightly unclear rights and responsibilities. So I'm sure many of you who have land at risk of flooding, you're never quite sure, is there an internal drainage board that's responsible for it? Is it your responsibility? Is it the Environment Agency's? It can be really difficult to know if you have the right to mitigate flood risk on your own land, or whether you're meant to be waiting for the Environment Agency to come in and do it. So it's important that we know, yeah, that we know who is responsible for what, basically, and who is responsible for mitigating flood risk in your area. And the last is quite linked to that. There's been a lack of investment recently in flood defence infrastructure, and crucially a lack of investment in maintenance. The government's earmarked a lot of money for flood defence in the recent budget, but all of it is going towards investment in new flood defences. And actually we have a lot of fantastic flood defences that just need to be well maintained. So that's going to be an increasing challenge, making sure that what we've got is looked after well. So there's a number of solutions that the CLA is proposing on this. Investment in research and development into natural flood risk management. That does seem that there's a lot of benefits to schemes like natural flood risk management, spanning all sorts of different yeah, all sorts of different benefits, biodiversity, things like that. It's hopeful that it can be incentivised through future agriculture policy. Reservoirs, again, we can use reservoirs to hold back floodwater, using bodies like internal drainage boards to help mitigate flood risk. It's often acknowledged that they're usually best placed to be undertaking land drainage and flood risk work. Making sure that farmers and landowners are adequately compensated in situations where they allow for their land to be flooded to prevent further flooding downstream. That's happens across the country, and it's just really important that landowners are looked after for that. And also making sure that the planning system works well to help support flood risk work. I'll race through water quality. All of these greatly impact water quality. You can, when there's drought, it increases erosion risk and runoff risk, and same thing with flood. It can massively increase what is ending up in our waterways. So, and it's difficult to find out where it all came from. There are a number of solutions, and a lot of them are in the hands of farmers. We need to be making sure that we are doing things like planting waterways up, covering slurry, using fertilizer and pesticides efficiently, but also reducing our reliance on abstracted water in rivers, because the less we're taking out of the rivers, the more water is in there and can be diluting the pollution. So it is important that we sort of acknowledge that we have an impact on the wider water environment and do everything we can to minimize that. Just to briefly summarize, it is all about our CLA water strategy will be all about ensuring we've got resilient farmers, but also helping the resilience of the environment. For a number of those solutions that I've outlined basically cut across all of them, have a big impact on the wider water environment. So it's really important that we prioritise those. We will be heavily lobbying for them, but also taking some of these matters into our own hands, and where we can help make change, we need to be doing so. So with that, I will pass you over to Robin Price, who will be talking to you from Water Resources East. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody. So yes, thank you very much indeed, Alice, for that introduction. So my name is Robin Price. I'm the Managing Director of Water Resources East, and I'm going to talk around some of the work that Alice alluded to here in Eastern England, how we are collaborating to secure future water resources. So there's been a bit of a seismic change in government policy around water resources over the last 2 or 3 years. For those of you that are familiar with with how water resource planning has occurred previously, it's been very much focused on public water supply. It's been very much driven by water companies, and risk has been managed very much within company geographies. And moving forward, following reports from the National Infrastructure Commission, from Water UK, from government, from DEFRA, the Environment Agency, the future is very much around national, regional and water company resolution, but really making sure that all water resource planning activities drive true multi-sector and public value, and really step up in the level of environmental ambition that is achieved, making sure there's a very much stronger connection between the catchment and abstraction reform. And there are 2 critical enablers for this as we move forward into the next planning periods. And the first one is the recent publication of a national framework for water resources by the Environment Agency. This was the fruit of 2 years very collaborative labour by the Environment Agency, working with water companies, many different sectors to put together a national and overarching framework for the future of water resource management. And also by the setup, the convening of RAPID, which is the Regulatory Alliance for Progressing Infrastructure Development. So what we now have is we've got a tool, we've got a national framework, and we've got an alignment of regulators to drive us forward and make sure things really happen, which is really exciting. So in terms of water resources,
Robin, sorry, your mic is sounding a bit crackly. I wonder if it's worth you switching off your camera to see if it helps with the...
Is that a little bit better, Kath?
It sounds a bit better, yeah. That sounds better quality. Thank you.
Wonderful. All right, thank you very much. Apologies. I may have a child on YouTube somewhere in the house, so forgive me. So yeah, Water Resources East, we are one of 5 regional planning groups set up and formed under the national framework. So we cover Eastern England, and we cover an area from the Humber Bank across into Nottinghamshire, Leicestershire, and down to the Hertfordshire border and round into Essex. Our colleagues are in Water Resources South East, West Country, Water Resources West, and Water Resources North. And what I want to talk about a little bit more today is around the work of Water Resources East. What are we doing in the east of England, in Eastern England? I keep getting told off by referring to the east of England when I move into places like Lincolnshire and Nottinghamshire, and I'm told that that's the East Midlands. So just having trouble moving my slides on. There we are, wonderful. So how does Water Resources East operate? Well, we are unique amongst the 5 regional groups in that we are operating, we're now set up as an independent company. So we are not for profit, company limited by guarantee, and we're based at the University of East Anglia over in Norwich. And we have a multi-sector board of directors. We have the 5 water companies that operate in our area. We have the NFU and the CLA. Delighted Kath is one of the directors of Water Resources East. We have the Rivers Trust, we have the RSPB, Lincolnshire, Norfolk and Suffolk County Councils, the Broads Authority, the Association of Drainage Authorities, and RWE NPower, one of the big power companies. So a really multi-sector collaborative board who are driving the strategy forward. And we operate as a membership organisation. So the spirit, so the role we have to do is to produce a regional plan. And what we don't want to do is produce a regional plan for Eastern England and then send it out to a load of people and say, what do you think? And kind of wait for your responses. Our kind of ethos and philosophy is very much one around co-creation and engagement and collective decision making. So we are very deliberately a membership organisation. We're up to our 89th member joined us yesterday, which is just fantastic. So, and we have a range, a very diverse group of stakeholders. We have water companies, we have community groups, environmental groups, power companies, county councils, universities, and individual landowners and consultants, which is fantastic. And the job we have to do is really to think around what does the future, what are the future needs of water for Eastern England. So if we look at Eastern England today, again, we are unusual amongst the regions in that, given the diversity of water usage, but also just how big that kind of that chunk of the pie is around non-public water supply abstraction. So 15% of water taken from the environment is used for non-public water supply purposes in this region, and that compare that to London and the southeast, where that figure is 3%. So we've got a very, very interesting planning problem to deal with. And you can see that well over half of that non-public water supply usage is for spray irrigation, and a huge chunk of water is then used to process the food that is grown. So probably not a great surprise for those of us that live and work across East Anglia. But looking forward, there really is trouble brewing, and Alice could have alluded to the fact we may be running out of water, and the current modelling work and the figures that we are developing now show that by the 2050s, we will have a deficit of somewhere between 530 and just over 1,600 million litres per day as a deficit across Eastern England. This is driven by climate change. This is driven by sustainability reductions, the need to restore and enhance the environment. Growth, we're a region of very high population growth. We're also looking at kind of the decarbonisation agenda as we move to a hydrogen economy. The hydrogen generation is going to need an awful lot of water. And we predict a huge increase in the amount of water which is needed for irrigation. And one of the things that's very stark in this table is just the difference between the lower and the upper figures. And our work over the next year or two is to really try and narrow the gap and work with all sectors to understand their future water needs in our region. So our strategy, the strategy for Eastern England, and it's wonderful to see that this resonates beautifully with the CLA's water strategy. So I'm grateful that, really great to hear more about that from Alice today. The very first thing we must do, of course, and Alice mentioned this, is make sure that we're all as water efficient as we can possibly be. What we can't do is we can't go building stuff. We can't go building things and building pipes and reservoirs and transfers until we've really assured ourselves we are being truly as efficient as we can be. And this is across all sectors. And, this irrigated agriculture, the power sector, the leisure sector. 66% of golf courses are watered with mains water, which I'm looking at the moment. But as Alice mentioned as well, very much thinking around our responsibility in our homes and businesses. We absolutely need to promote the need for additional storage of water within the landscape, and there's a real opportunity to join up the worlds of flood risk and water resources. So as Alice's graphs show, we've gone from the driest February on record to the wettest February on record to the driest May on record. And what have we done with that water? Where's that water gone? Well, our fabulous drainage boards, Environment Agency have done exactly what is needed, and they've drained that water away. They've got rid of it as fast as they can to restore the land and livelihoods, and they've pumped it into the sea. Now, wouldn't it be wonderful if we had somewhere rather more useful to put some of that water rather than in the sea? So absolutely, we absolutely back a strategy for more reservoirs, both on farm right the way through to land scale, kind of Rutland water, Grafham water-esque reservoirs. A real opportunity to link with flood risk. We obviously then need to move water. We need to transfer water from areas of surplus to areas of deficit, and we're really hoping to maximise the use of open water channels as well as pipelines. Open water channels create additional flood risk, additional storage. They create well-being, tourism, navigation opportunities, and they're also much nicer to go for a walk along rather than a buried pipe kind of 8 feet below your feet. So, and really importantly, they create wildlife corridors and opportunities for new habitats. We recognise very strongly within WRE and within the national framework the link between land and water management, and how you can, again, we're very excited through ELM, the opportunities through ELMS around what can you do on the land that delivers water-related ecosystem services. So how can we use this land use to increase resilience and restore and enhance the natural systems and resources which we all depend on. But we do need to look at some hotspots. It's very, very clear in our region there are some hotspots, some places in our region where abstraction is definitely having a detrimental impact on the environment. And what we need to do is develop options which restore and enhance those. But what we can't allow those to do is kind of stifle sustainable economic development. So we really do want our cake and eat it here in WRE, and we want to work with all of our stakeholders to understand how can we protect the environment and accommodate new growth and accommodate a thriving agriculture and food production sector. So a very important part of our strategy. We want to think about other sources of water for our region. I talked around kind of pumping water out to sea, but again, there may be an opportunity around desalination. So how can we, as we link desalination to kind of offshore renewable energy, make some of this a bit more carbon neutral, a bit more carbon friendly than it is now. But also, how can we think around water reuse? And there's a fantastic scheme developed by Anglian Water and the Norfolk Rivers Trust at Ingoldsthorpe, where effluent is taken from a nearby water recycling centre. It passes through a wetland and it's returned in much better quality to a local chalk stream. So what are the opportunities around kind of taking some of that water and using it, for example, to fill irrigation reservoirs, etc. So we are less reliant on water from the environment. So lots of interesting discussions to be had. And we absolutely recognise that we have to contribute to low carbon strategies and plans. This region has a net zero ambition, and many organisations, including the CLA, have ambition to become net zero. So we really must play our part in this as well. So our regional plan that we will develop over the next 2 years, we will publish this in the summer of 2022 for final publication in 2023. What we're seeking to do is increase the level of resilience, as I've talked about, deliver these wider benefits, flood risk, river flow and water quality, making sure water isn't a barrier to economic development. What are the delivery mechanisms to restore and enhance the environment, and how can we explore some innovative funding and delivery models for some of these solutions? And really, how can we promote schemes which are the best value for our region? And really critically, what we want to do throughout all of this is produce academically rigorous evidence to policymakers, so that we can truly go to government and say this is the art of the possible. Just very, very briefly, as I come to the end, we're trying to do this. How are we doing this? So we are producing the regional plan. That's got a lot of technical modelling work, but we're also looking to pilot some projects across the region to test different concepts, different scales, different partnerships. And our independence as an organisation really gives us a really good opportunity to draw together some very interesting partnerships. So we're working in Fenland to look at a Fenland adaptation strategy. What does an adaptation strategy look like? Linking some of the flood risk associated with some of the mighty rivers in Eastern England, the Nene, the Ouse, the Welland and the Trent. How can we take some of that water, and again, rather than pumping it into the sea, how can we use that to fill reservoirs? How can we manage the water table in a different way, work with our IDBs to transform water? What's the role in kind of the preservation of the peat, which drives the agricultural kind of prosperity in this region? We're looking at a water management strategy for the county of Norfolk, and again, pulling together a very interesting collaboration of organisations, from environmental organisations to the local authorities, to abstractor groups, to the Environment Bank, thinking around habitat banks, water companies, all looking at the development of a cohesive strategy on a county basis. Again, this isn't necessarily working on hydrological boundaries, this is working along political boundaries, which will be a very interesting experiment. And again, one of the places where abstraction is really causing significant potential environmental harm is in across the chalk streams, and we're working very hard with, we have a very interesting partnership developing with the local landowner in South Cambridgeshire, with the Cam Valley Forum, who are the local campaign group through Natural Cambridgeshire, the Cambridge County Council, and Cambridge Water, and the NFU and CLA. So again, really interesting partnerships developing to really move forward on some land use change. And we're looking, we're trying to use for this, we've just applied for some money through Interreg, some European money, to look at how we can influence water abstraction plans. One of the things that's lacking in some of these catchments is information, real-time information around how catchments are operating and how water is available and whose turn it is, if you like, to have that water. So how can we develop catchment plans and a series of dynamic catchment rules for all abstractors? So back to co-creation and engagement. Please, if there are any organisations wish to come and join us, we would welcome an application from you as we move forward to co-create, engage with you and deliver this strategy. Thank you very much indeed. You can find out more. You can contact, my contact details are there. You can also find us on we have a fantastic website, and you can also find us on Twitter and on LinkedIn. Thank you very much indeed. It's my pleasure to now introduce Russell De Beer, who's a director in the Norwich office of Strutt & Parker. Thank you very much.
Robin, thank you very much, and thank you for such a thought-provoking, inspiring presentation with so many positive things to think about. So I'm going to keep my video off for hopefully voice quality purposes. So I'm based in Norwich, but my team, the team I work in, extends down to Cambridge and Suffolk, but I look after the Norfolk section. So the mention of reservoirs has been raised a couple of times this morning, and that's going to be the focus of my talk today. A brief agenda there, going to cover 5 different points and then round up with a summary. So starting with commercial benefits. In my experience, reservoirs are much better suited to landowners who already have the ability to grow irrigated crops. Principally, key requirements include relevant management skills, crop expertise, infrastructure and equipment, and really the benefit of growing irrigatable crops on your own land rather than renting in land from a neighbour. I mentioned joint ventures there. We have had a number of discussions about joint ventures, but that becomes more complicated, because where are they located, and there needs to be a wider agreement in place. And also the deconstruction of that proves some challenges as well, but the concept, I think, is a really good one. Diversification and risk management has been mentioned previously, but growing irrigatable crops clearly creates wider rotations in the crop cycle, better break crops and less reliance upon individual markets, and hopefully fewer diseases as well. Reservoirs really suit and support expansive and developing businesses, so long as topography and situation allows. And not only do the reservoir has an asset value subject to having a perpetual abstraction license. I'm not going to go into that in much detail due to the time restrictions. But in terms of a guide, if one looks at principally the ABC costings, and a gross margin of feed wheat will typically be about £839 a hectare, versus ware potatoes of circa £345 a hectare for a gross margin. So you can see that the opportunity for potatoes is enormous. And our Strutt & Parker farm benching exercise last year, our research showed that an average net margin of winter wheat was 287, and potatoes was a 1,800. So significant increase. In terms of the capital value, the capital value will very much depend upon the location. And for example, if one's talking about the Brecks against East Norfolk, there's going to be a huge variation in value. But typically, I would suggest looking anywhere between £1,000 and perhaps £1,500 an acre, but very much location dependent. So Plan Commission mentioned also this morning, so not dwelling too much on the application for water resource licenses, but if a farm owner or landowner or estate owner wanted to consider a reservoir, the planning stages would be, I would always suggest looking at a pre-application planning advice service. All the local authorities, certainly Norfolk, offer those. They're all a bit different, but that is a really good indication of whether the scheme is likely to be supported. And also, it's a really good opportunity to engage at an early stage with the planners, and I think engagement is so important. If one receives a positive outcome at that juncture, then the next stage will be to engage with a specialist contractor to prepare drawings, look at some engineering aspects, looking at potentially where it might be sited, and all those drawings will be needed ahead of the planning application. And then just very briefly, I'm just going to run through the design and access statement. Design and access statement really provides the narrative of what you're going to do, and it takes the planning officer through that journey. So previous applications that I've completed include a process which is about the assessment, so a summary of the business, what it involves and what the benefits would be. The physical aspect, so what is the reservoir physically going to hold, how big is it, where is it going to be, what's the capacity, what are the working hours of construction. Next I would talk about social, particularly with growing of specialist crops, there's often an opportunity to have a more diverse workforce and therefore potentially employment of other people. Job creation for all local authorities is really important. That feeds into economic, and one's looking here about the economic sustainability of farming business. Then one goes into policy. Typically, one starts with PPS 7, national planning policy, and other policies that promote expansive agriculture. Involvement is necessary here, I think, to demonstrate what has happened, or what process has been taking place with the local authority about pre-application discussions. Section on design, which is quite standard, leading from the contractor's specification. Use is important to determine actually where it's going to be used and what for. Amount, layout, scale. Landscaping is really important, and these constructions can be significant, and therefore is important to create a sensitive outcome with landscaping. And depending on where it's located, things such as fences and protectionary measures around the outside is really important. So moving on to site specifics and costings. When I talk to specialist contractors, they always underline to me the importance of site investigations. And by this, I mean some geophysical surveys, initially perhaps some desktop map research. But the most important thing is to understand what subsoil and what structure of soil you've got to construct in. And clearly every farm, or a lot of farms, will have a range of different soils across them, but equally some fields can have exactly the same situation. So in my experience, it can really be a false economy if you don't carry out some boreholes and some testings to the right depths, appropriate depths as much as you can, to give you, the landowner, and secondly the contractor, as good as information as you can get as to what the soil condition is and what you're likely to be able to construct in. There have been examples of people not carrying out very extensive investigations and having to increase the size of reservoir, making it shallower but larger. Of course, that's a disaster because you're sterilizing a greater amount of land. Location is really important. Now, typically reservoirs need to be located near light land, which facilitates irrigatable crops. If you locate a reservoir near light land, then typically it's not going to be clay lined, and therefore you're going to have to look at a high density polythene lining, or at least in part. Alternatively, the preference typically is a clay lined reservoir, but that does very much limit the location. So if one's looking at a reservoir slightly away from some irrigated or irrigatable land, factors to consider would be, if it is further away, what infrastructure, pipework, irrigation ring mains you have to include, which in order to transfer the water from one location to the other. That of course comes at an increased cost, and there also can be complications surrounding granting of easements. So coming on to the construction briefly, the clay lined method is always the preferred route, and contractors much prefer that proposal. And in terms of costing, I'm advised that actually the costings are between 6,000, 7,000 per million gallons, or for those that work in litres, that's 3.785 million litres. And the high density polythene is typically double that cost. So it's a significant increase. Construction, it's really important to have a specialist contractor. I can't underline that enough. And typically the costs of constructing reservoirs, aside from the lining aspect, haven't really changed over the time, because principally what one needs is a machine, an individual, and fuel. And they haven't gone up proportionally. I think the most important thing about construction would be the skill of the operator, and to ensure that they have the ability and skill set and experience to carry out the work. And then very briefly, sizes. The size of reservoirs range hugely, 90 million to 130 million litres, just as a sort of a range. So I'm going to talk briefly about grant funding, and this is perhaps slightly retrospective because this scheme isn't relevant anymore. But RDPE was a great scheme, and it provided up to 40% of a funding of a project, minimum claim 35,000. Some examples there of what it did. And the challenge behind that was that you wouldn't, in my experience, apply for a reservoir solely for the grant funding. It was very much part of the whole process. It's a huge investment and strategic investment, and therefore the grant funding was a huge positive, but not necessarily the driver. And one point to note on that, the kind of the key things of obtaining grant funding and the planning permission was to confirm with the Environment Agency the status of the water body, and that has to be classified in good condition. Otherwise you won't get your grant funding, and planning permission won't be granted either. So penultimate slide, other opportunities. I have been involved in a reservoir with our floating solar panels, which worked really well. Clearly that has to be close to a grid connection, either to feed in or to a substation for use on farm. And then other possible leisure factors, private leisure factors I've included here. I think there's great concern over health and safety and liability. So from my experience, I have seen some private leisure uses, but I haven't seen anything public. That might be an aspiration, and whatever new grant funding scheme is available, that might further promote public use. But I think that would be quite a challenge. So in summary, there are absolutely some commercial benefits and capital benefits to enhance the land. Engagement with the local planning authority, seeking professional advice, I suppose I would say that, but that's really important. Site investigations are vital. I think it can save a lot of costs in the long term. Grant funding, in whatever scheme that may be available, is key to look at. And non-agricultural opportunities, hopefully they will become more expansive as we go forward. So thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to Oliver from Barclays. Thank you.
Hi, good morning everyone. Thank you, Russell, and also to Alice and Robin for their presentations. All interesting, all looking at it from a slightly different angle, I think. Kind of individual and catchment basis with Alice, and then huge catchments from Robin, and then the practicalities from Russell as well. I think you know, we are delighted to partner these with CLA and Stratton Parker, and I think from sort of, you know, from a banking perspective, you know, we're talking about, Alice has already told us, we've got more extreme weather events. That's something we have been talking about as an industry for the last sort of 6-8 years. And, you know, but we are very fortunate. We live in a quite temperate climate. We did see some increases in temperature on Alice's slides, and increases in sunshine amounts, and also some real increases in rainfall. Probably, if we could level it all out over the year, we'd have the perfect climate to grow everything and anything, I think. But having said that, a temperate climate that's sort of warming, and seeing more sort of extreme weather events is either going to start looking at new crops as the sort of climate change bites a little harder, or if we want to stick to growing the same crops, we're going to have to look at investment in infrastructure. For us, you know, we've discussed this morning, far better experts than I, everything from flood to storage to supply and shortages. I think, you know, for us as a pure banking transaction, we tend to historically perhaps just look at water as an irrigation reservoir. And again, probably just looking at that historically as something to boost yields, you know, especially in those high water usage crops like potatoes that Russell spoke about. I think now it's not all about yields and income. When you look at some of the maps that Alice put up, it's actually about risk management. You know, it's about flood risk. If you're getting crops washed away with an extreme rainfall event, you know, that's income gone. You know, if we can, you know, if you look at something like soil organic matter, I saw a great statistic from some American research that Tom Morrison presented to the Barclays Ag team. A soil with an organic matter of 1.7% can have an infiltration rate of 1/2 inch of rain an hour. If that organic matter is at the other end of the extreme, 6.9%, that soil can cope with 30 inches of rain in an hour as an infiltration rate. So if you're looking at protecting land from flood, you know, higher organic matter is going to help you. It's going to hold water in your soil, but also with sort of carbon sequestration. And I don't want to mix my webinars because it's water specific today. But you know, potentially there could be sort of 2 wins from that sort of thing. The other one is drought, and you know, Russell covered that off. You know, the differences in gross margins and what have you, of higher value crops. And the other one is soil erosion. You know, there's a great phrase. I always say it's up north, but I think they've got it. I think they've got it everywhere. When a piece of farmland sells for quite a decent sum of money, the explanation is always, well, we're not making them more, are we? So soil erosion is a big issue, and whether that's runoff, you know, with that rainfall, or it's actually wind blow at times of drought, you know, soil is our greatest asset when you combine it with water, nutrients, and organic matter. So for us, looking forward, you know, it's going to be about the transaction and the request for funds and funding, whether that's a reservoir, whether that's utilising pieces of land to really build organic matter and you know, perhaps gain some carbon credits, but also hold that water off other more valuable crops will be interesting. And historically, the banking, you know, any investment was, well, what's the return? And you know, traditionally, we want to see what's the income boost from the money you're going to spend. Probably 8 or 10 years ago, probably a little more than that, we did start taking into account things like quality of life, or you know, robotic milkers, perhaps people with young families not tied to the parlour 2-3 hours morning and night just when the kids were sort of getting up or going to bed, or automated processing lines. More recently, especially over the last 3-4 years, we get investment requests to mitigate the risk of not being able to secure labour. Again, those sort of automated packing lines. I think what we're evolving to, and we are seeing a little bit of it now, is we're looking at investment for risk management. And again, whether that's flood, whether that's soil runoff, wind blow, it's not just about the resource and its produce and yield and income, but it's about protecting the resource and protecting the produce and the yield so that we know we've got an income. I've said it before, I'm going to say it again, and I'll say it again in the future. There's so much change coming up. I've been involved in agriculture for 40 years. I think the next 10 years are going to be the most exciting, the most innovative, and we as an industry have to go into those 10 years with our heads up and our eyes open and embracing the opportunities that are out there. With that, I will hand back to Kath, and I think we're going to move into some Q&A, aren't we, Kath?
Yeah, thanks, Oliver. So if I could get all the speakers to turn back on their cameras if they are able to, and their mics. And we've got a few questions that have come in here. If anyone else has any questions, please do type it into the Q&A panel and we will get through as many as we can. So I've got a question here for Alice. Irrigation and on-farm reservoirs versus soil management and increased organic matter to reduce the need for irrigation. What are your thoughts on that, Alice?
That's a great question. I think what it's really going to come down to in the future is increasing overall resilience, and looking at water use in a really holistic way. So for some farms that will be all about improving their soil management, increasing organic matter. We know that, as Oliver covered, having really good soil quality, good soil health can reduce flood risk, make us more resilient to drought. Helps the crops with their take up of water and all of that kind of stuff. So it's a huge part of the picture. And I think for many farms, it'll be a combination of both using water more efficiently through improving soil management, but also making sure that they do have access to water if they need it. And that's where the water reservoirs and irrigation will come in.
Great, thank you. Question for Robin. How can other farmers and landowners get involved with their local regional planning group, such as Water Resources East, or if they're in another area, Water Resources North?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, so all of us would be delighted to hear from landowners and farmers who've got ideas around water management. What we're all looking for is kind of those of you that are really proud of what you've done already, the way you manage water already. We're looking for those case studies, those exemplars, those practices that have already gone. I firmly believe we've kind of solved quite a lot of the water problems, but we've done it across many different locations. And what we want to try and do is kind of pull that jigsaw together. So myself or Kath or Alice, through the CLA or WRA, we can put you in contact with your local regional planning group with no problem at all. We'd just be delighted to hear from you some case studies and stuff you're proud of with managing water.
Great. There's a few questions on reservoirs. I know that our CLA reservoir handbook is due to be published in the next week or so. So if you are subscribed to receive the CLA handbooks, then you will receive a copy of that. If not, you can order a copy on the website. Russell, could you have a combination of construction being part clay and part lined?
Yes, in theory, that'll be fine. A lot of the contractors that I speak to much prefer to construct clay-lined reservoirs because it is simpler. But yes, absolutely. If you wanted to line the bottom with a polyethylene surface and then have the walls capped clay, that would be fine. I mean, it's sort of location, site-specific, really.
Great. A question here for Alice. What can farmers and landowners do to improve their water footprint? I've also got another question which isn't dissimilar, asking about the use of different types of irrigation, which I think you've answered on the screen, but you might want to touch on that as well.
Sure. So we're really encouraging people to undertake a water audit where possible, quite similar to a carbon footprint. Just measures what you're using and what you're doing on your farm, and then can help you help you reduce your water footprint if that's what you want to be doing. Using precision agriculture techniques, there's a lot of really cool innovation out there that can help you use water more efficiently. So yeah, undertaking all of that. And I've referred that the question about different types of irrigation equipment onto the AHDB, who have a huge wealth of resources and expertise on that kind of stuff. They're really fantastic, a really fantastic resource when it comes to water use.
Question from Alan Woods. With climate change, is there a risk that direct abstraction from rivers and boreholes during the summer will simply be banned in the future to ensure summer river flows are maintained to protect the environment? Can WRE or the CLA assess what investment would be needed in reservoirs for storage of high flows to secure water supplies for irrigators? And I guess that obviously we're doing a huge amount of work on the Environment Bill, which is due to come back to Parliament quite soon.
Yeah, I can see Rob might have something to add, but we're doing a lot of work into reservoir investment and how much is needed, both for smaller scale on-farm reservoirs, but also how much investment is needed in the larger scale kind of national level, national level ones. But there's definitely a move at the moment in government towards making abstraction more sustainable, and we do think that will result in a lower availability of water for some abstraction licence holders. There's a clause in the current Environment Bill that's proposing to take away or increase the circumstances where the Environment Agency can revoke or change abstraction licences without providing compensation. We are opposing this. We believe that abstraction licences are property rights and business assets and really important. And if they're going to be taken away, at the very least, the landowner should be offered compensation. But that is definitely the way that things are looking, and with increasing pressure on the water environment, it's a great idea to start thinking about it now and trying to reduce our reliance on abstracted water where possible. But yeah, this is a big CLA point for lobbying over the next few years.
But just to add to that, Alice, I don't believe we're going to get to a point where there is a blanket ban of direct abstraction. Many rivers and the landscapes our modelling shows rivers like the Great Ouse in Cambridgeshire are very resilient to climate change kind of future scenarios. So rivers like that are okay, and that's the sort of sources we want to manage. The thing we're calling for is kind of more dynamic information around how much water is available. It's rather binary. You can take water in the winter, but not in the summer. But if it's a soggy summer and there's plenty of water in the environment, then why can't we take it? And we lack telemetry, we lack systems, and that's some of the stuff we want to work with the NFU and the CLA very closely on and landowners around these systems and telemetry. So we've got the catchment monitor, we know exactly how much water is there, and then we've worked out some rules to say who can take it on any particular given day. And I think in terms of thinking around future capacity for reservoir storage, the thing we'd love to know, and it's $1 million question, is how much water do you need as agriculture? How much water will you be using in 2050? And then we can plan around that kind of thing. So, and I know that's a glib question and everything, because who knows, but that's one of the really thorny issues, one of the really interesting, exciting opportunities we've got by working with organisations like the CLA on the water strategy to understand your future needs. What are the future needs for agriculture, and how can we plan and accommodate those?
Yeah, I think that the water strategy is one of the things that we've been talking about at our branch committees over the last few weeks, and the need for flexibility has been talked about over and over again. A question about flooding. How do you feel that farmers and landowners could be compensated for land offered for flood attenuation? Alice, do you want to start on that one?
Yeah, sure. That again, that's something that we're doing quite a lot of work in, trying to quantify how much value farmers are adding to urban areas where they're allowing the land to be flooded to protect or mitigate against flood risk further downstream. There's currently options through countryside stewardship. There's also a lot of kind of historical agreements that were made that compensate farmers who allow their land to be flooded, but we're really after evidence at the moment. If anyone is in a similar circumstance, it'd be great to find out what you're involved in and what you're doing, and we can start looking at quantifying it, because it's really important that we demonstrate to government just how important that is to protect urban areas or villages and things like that.
And we would fully support that, absolutely, looking for case studies. So if there are people who are already farming water as opposed to farming food or whatever, and there's some examples and there's a way of working it, but we need some evidence in terms of the opportunity, and then absolutely right behind the CLA in terms of then working with the government to make sure the mechanisms and the incentives are correct, so farmers are rewarded adequately for managing water in a more sustainable way. Absolutely.
And just very briefly, if I may, just comment on that point in terms of a compulsory purchase type scenario, which this wouldn't be. The concept would be that the landowner is no worse off as a result of the scheme. So the starting point would be is the replacement value of that land. So I imagine from a negotiating point, that was where one will begin.
Yeah, and obviously the previous schemes, that's not how it was necessarily assessed, but we've got a lot of work to do, I think, over the next few years on this. I've been talking to a lot of members who have been flooded, sort of last year especially, and making sure that they're fairly compensated. We all accept that homes and businesses need to be protected over land, but it's not fair for farmers to lose out when they're flooded in those situations. The demands for water quality seem to keep tightening. For remote farms providing alternate sources to traditional ones, they can be prohibitively expensive. Is there any sign of government support for water infrastructure like this?
I can start if you'd like. So water quality is listed in the Agriculture Bill as one of the public goods that the government is going to be looking at in their environmental land management scheme that will be replacing BPS. So it is looking likely that there'll be some type of government support for water quality improvements and taking action or measures to reduce runoff and things like that. But there's so many different regulations, so much different guidance, and it can be really, really confusing for people to know what, whether they're in an NVZ or anything like that. It's nitrate vulnerable zone. So the CLA is going to be producing a guidance note shortly in sort of the next couple of months, aiming just to kind of simplify it a wee bit and talk through all the different pieces of regulation and legislation and what's advised and what needs to be followed and what's best practice and all of that, because it's extremely complicated and can be extremely expensive.
Quick question for Russell before we finish. What's the likely increase in value of a holding which benefits from a reservoir?
Okay, so I touched on this briefly. I think principally it's location dependent. If you have a reservoir with a perpetual license and you're based in the Brecks, then hugely valuable, and you could be talking many thousands of pounds an acre. Clearly, if you're in the east of the county, where water is much more readily available, then it's less. So the answer is it depends. But absolutely, with perpetual license, it would add value. So not particularly helpful, but if anyone had any specific questions they wanted to understand what value it might increase or what value a reservoir currently increases their holding, I'd be very happy to discuss further.
Great. Thanks all. We've had various other questions in, but I think we're running out of time. If you would like to discuss anything that was raised today, if you want to raise your question separately, please do get in touch with the regional office or with Alice and Robin or any of the other speakers. Thank you to our sponsors again, Stretton Parker and Barclays. Please look out for our future webinars or go to the CLA website to view previous webinars. You can see the recordings there. Next week's seminar will look at the changes ahead for farmers and landowners as we move away from CAP, and the following week we'll cover carbon accounting. We also have in conversation with this Friday with Baroness Young of Old Scone. She's the chairman of the Woodland Trust, a member of the House of Lords with interest in the environment, agriculture, natural resources and climate change. Thank you again for joining.